Welcome to another episode of Tomes and Tunes. I am your host, Arielle Silver. I am a performing songwriter, essayist, and educator. Gosh, that educator. Why does that sound so nerdy? It does. I'm never going to say that again. In any case, we are on the 50th episode of Tomes and Tunes. I'm a book nerd. That sounds a lot better, doesn't it? And I'm a songwriter. And when the pandemic happened, I wanted to talk with songwriters about pretty much anything, but I also wanted to talk with book lovers about books, and just did a whole mashup of it. So that was the birth of Tomes and Tunes, and 50th episode feels significant. It just started as a whim, and it's just kept going, and every week has been awesome to connect with songwriters from all over the place, as far-flung as Canada. Next week we have another Canadian on the show, and Amsterdam in Europe, and gosh, everywhere in the US. So today, going not too far up the road from where I am in Los Angeles, I have songwriter and novelist and doctor. I think he might be the first doctor we're having on the show, James Kahn, and I'm going to bring him in right now. Hello, Dr. James.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Did I say your last name right, by the way? Kahn, right?
Kahn, yeah, sure.
Okay, right, good. I should have checked that before. So, of course, as always, we were having really good conversation in the green room before the show. And I just want to invite the audience in when they show up to just continue on with all the things that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Thanks
sure.
for being here.
My pleasure.
So you, I'm fascinated by this idea that what came first? Music, writing, doctoring?
Well, writing came first. I started writing when I was 9, and I would read these strange tales and amazing stories and Tales from the Crypt comic books, but I wouldn't like the way they ended, or I would think of a plot point that they didn't have. So I'd write them all out in my little 3-ring binder notebook, and would make the stories different, change them a little bit. So that was kind of my first love. And then I started playing guitar when I was probably 15, rock and roll kind of stuff.
So you would take your red pen to the published comic books.
Right, exactly.
Basically.
Exactly.
Like, this ending is no good. Cross it off. We're rewriting that. Go back to the drawing board.
I should have been a producer.
That's awesome. That's so funny.
So then I got into music in high school, a little more in college, rock and roll bands in college and that kind of thing. And then I finally got into medicine at the end of college.
There was a guy in college, I took a couple of painting classes, and I remember he was just a wonderful artist. I loved his work, and we would always talk in the back room when we were cleaning our brushes and all of that stuff, and somehow I managed to get paint everywhere on me in those classes. I was not so much a painter as a mess maker, but in any case, I thought it was very interesting. He loved art. He was also a musician, and he came to me one day. He said, I'm gonna go pre-med. I'm gonna be a doctor.
Wow.
And I still remember that conversation, and just sort of my jaw opening, I guess, because for me, I wanted to just head first lean into being a musician, just have that steer my life. But for him, he was like, I want something that's going to be more of a structured career.
More stable.
Stable, yeah. Was that part of your decision to do that?
To a certain extent. I have to say, I was drawn to the sorcery aspects of medicine. The kind of, I was very into science fiction and fantasy novels at that time too. But the idea of sort of pulling people back from the dead, of sort of struggling with death and sickness and being the champion of that was kind of psychically appealing to me.
Wow. Very interesting.
Which is also what sort of funneled me into emergency medicine, because in
Yeah, I was
emergency
gonna
rooms,
ask.
that's totally where that happens. It's like
Yeah,
someone
absolutely.
comes in dead, and you literally bring them back. It was very exciting.
Wow. It's funny. I was telling you before the show how my friend, we were in music school at the time when I turned 29 and she served me a cake with a dinosaur on it. She was a lot younger and she ended up later on becoming an emergency room doctor
Oh,
and a fiddle player. And
interesting.
I mean, she was a fiddle player at the time, and now she's a ER doctor. So it's funny with that dinosaur behind you, and she talks about just the fast-paced, improvisatory nature of being in the ER, and
Yeah.
I always have sort of put that together in my head with her being a bluegrass fiddle player, and just the
Interesting.
improvisatory nature, just
Yeah,
having to
yeah.
be hyper in tune with no pun intended, but
Right,
hyper in tune
exactly.
with what is going
No,
on, the energy of
there's
the
a
moment.
very much a real flow state involved with it that
Ah,
I don't experience in sort of office medicine, where you're in your chair, people come in, you talk. Emergency room is much more of a dynamic situation.
right.
Although the other thing that was really appealing about the emergency room was, unlike other kinds of medicine, when you're on, you're really on, but then you can schedule yourself off as much as you want. And when you're off, you're not getting called by the hospital to see your patients. Your time is your own. So I could schedule myself on, 3 12-hour shifts in a row and then take a week off and write or play music or play or whatever.
Right, because you're not developing long-term relationships with the patients.
Right, which again becomes kind of a downside after years in the emergency room. You sort of, I began to miss that.
Did you ever develop a long-term relationship that like, you would see a patient or
Yeah,
just
well,
over
actually,
time?
the last probably dozen years since moving to Santa Barbara, I stopped working in the ER and just have been working in a accommodation family practice clinic and urgent care center, and so that was sort of a semi-retirement. It wasn't the intense, emergency room is kind of a young man's game, young woman's game, and so this is a little bit way to take it easy, but also then I got to know my patients.
And so when you said, you would schedule yourself 3 12-hour days and then take a week off to focus on music and writing, were you able during those times to fully retreat into this other world that you inhabited?
Yeah, for sure. Especially I was doing a lot of novel writing during those days. I wrote a science fiction trilogy of novels, and it required, or maybe I just did, fall very deeply into that world building that I had done, and sort of everything else, reality fell away, and I was living in that world. So it was good not to have phone calls from the outside all the time.
For sure. But must have been a hell of a transition when you would go back into the emergency room.
No, it wasn't really.
You had to leave that world?
Yeah, sort of compartmentalized things and
Wow.
went back and forth pretty easily.
Wow. That's impressive. So you played rock and roll and you wrote some novels and then
And
now
my
you're
band was
writing
called Lord Kelvin and the Absolute Zeros. It was my rock and roll band.
rock and roll. That's awesome. And the absolute zeros. Lord Kelvin?
Lord Kelvin was the British scientist who invented the Kelvin scale of temperature, which went to absolute zero.
Oh, that makes. Now I feel a little silly. That's awesome. Love it. When did you transition to sea shanties?
Oh gosh, I've loved sea shanties
Tell
my
me a
whole
little
life.
bit about that.
but we started having kids. I've got 3 kids who are all grown and scattered now. But when they were little, my wife Jill never wanted to have a dishwasher because she felt it was a great family bonding time. So we used to all stand at the sink washing dishes together and singing sea shanties, and it it's a great family memory, and it's stuck with me.
Where would everybody learn the sea shanties?
Well, we would. I don't even know there was an online to go to at that time, but we were all into folk music and various kinds of music like that, and they just seemed to crop up, and someone would learn one that they really liked, and they would teach it to the rest of us.
I love it. Where were you living at the time?
At that time, we were living here in Santa Barbara. We lived in LA until my oldest child, my daughter Laura, was about 3, and then Jill didn't want to raise our kids in LA at that point. So,
No need to ask why.
yeah. So we moved to the Sierras, actually, to a little town called Columbia in the Gold Rush country, and then my second son had just been born then, and then we had a third one while we were living up there. And we lived there about 8 years or so, and it was just beautiful. There were still active gold miners living there, and we'd hear them blasting in their gold mines. We had a waterfall in our backyard. It was just so idyllic.
Huh.
But then when my kids started getting to middle school age, I could see the writing on the wall that there just wasn't much for them to do once they started getting to high school. I mean, high school kids there were just incredibly bored and either getting into drinking or fast cars or not much for them. Our town had 800 people in it. So, and I still had an on and off career in Hollywood at that time. So we decided to move back to Santa Barbara as a kind of compromise. It was urban. There were lots of things to do. They would have lots of friends. We were also homeschooling up there. So their social contacts were sort of limited. So we came back to Santa Barbara for the culture and education and friends that it would provide. And it was close enough for me to get to LA when I needed to for television stuff.
So television stuff. You played a doctor on TV as well?
No, I was a writer-producer for, let's see, I was the executive producer, co-executive producer on Melrose Place. That's probably before your time. And Star Trek Voyager and Xena Warrior Princess and then a lot of things that you've never heard of.
Oh, wait, so so you started, did you take time off from medicine, or did that bookend this career one aside and the other, or simultaneous?
I was doing ER in LA, and some of my friends who are watching this now have heard this story many times, but we got a call from Kathleen Kennedy into the ER asking if anyone there could help her figure out how to resuscitate an alien. So a bunch of us doctors and nurses went down to the set of E.T., and they dressed us up in hazmat suits, and we were all the characters in the resuscitation scene, and I was pounding on E.T.'s chest, and I got to meet Spielberg, and at the time I gave Spielberg a copy of my first science fiction novel and said, gee, would you ever think about making a movie out of this? And he said, not really, but he read enough of it to assign me to write the novelization of Poltergeist. So I wrote that novelization, and that kind of got me into the whole movie and TV world. So I started writing spec scripts, and that got me an agent, and that got me a TV job, and then I ended up getting just a lot of TV jobs over the next 10 years.
You've lived multiple lives simultaneously, right?
Yes. An eclectic series of careers.
Amazing.
For sure.
I love that you just handed him your book and that you were part of the resuscitation.
It wasn't nearly as casual. It took me 2 days to work up the guts to do that. And I finally kept saying, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst? He could say no. That's the worst that could happen. He can't. So.
You have to throw the book in your face and
no.
stomp out of the room.
It's going to fire me off the set. Okay.
So going back to the sea shanty, I found myself wondering, I'm picturing you all standing around doing the dishes together, singing sea shanties.
Yeah.
There you are standing in Gold Rush country and homeschooling the kids, and people are gathering in the house, going out and finding these songs pre-internet,
Right.
and then coming home and teaching the family. Have you spent much time on boats?
I get horribly seasick. It's one of the great regrets of my life. I can take Dramamine ahead of time, and it moderates the experience, but it ain't fun. So I wish I could, but no. I just always had a huge romance for the sea and sailors and old pirate movies when I was a kid and all that.
So tell me about this sea shanty work that you're writing right now, or recording.
I've written 8 songs, and I've recorded the lead vocals on all of them, and now we're just putting together some harmonies and getting some people to sing along with it. I love the harmonies of sea shanties for one thing. Typical folk harmonies are 1-3-5. It's like pop harmonies, and sea shanties focus on the 1-5. There's a sort of, it's not discordant, but there's a lonely feeling to it that
The
describes.
middle's dropped out.
Yeah, exactly. So I've always loved that, and there's unison singing, which I love, and I love the language of them. So I've started writing these sea shanties that use the language of the old shanties, matey, and but they're about contemporary subjects that are somewhat crises of our time. So like climate change, immigrants sailing across the sea. There's one about COVID. Had to do one about COVID. One about saving the whales instead of harpooning them. So it's been a real gratifying kind of project.
The COVID one. Is there COVID on the ship?
No, actually, the COVID one, it doesn't have much to do with the sea, except passing reference to all the some of the immigration that's happening. It's partly about the year of COVID rather than just COVID per se, and sort of all the crises that it has manifested in society
Right.
just by being there.
Yeah. Have you written about COVID in other ways?
I have not, no, not really.
Yeah.
I started keeping a journal when this all began, and I just found it too overwhelming. I just wanted to stop. I didn't. It's like
Yeah.
it was sort of in my face so much all the time that
Yeah.
to keep it there by writing about it. You know, sometimes that can be very helpful, I know, to write it out, but not for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the historians would be very disappointed in my journals.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, what's happening? What?
Yeah.
There were major events and she doesn't even
Right.
mention them. And
Yeah.
the journal is sort of a place for other things to happen,
Right.
and to be expressed. So we were talking a little bit before the show about this year for you, and now it's a little more than a year since the beginning of it for us here in California. Really a year and 6 weeks, I guess, 7 weeks. So I still think of it as it's been a very long year.
It's been a long year, and there's
Yeah.
no like cap to it. It keeps kind of dribbling on and on and on. And
Yeah, a long tail,
Long
like
tail,
that,
yeah.
or like that dinosaur behind you again,
right.
right? With that, actually, it's kind of shaped like that dinosaur.
It is. It is.
Without a true ending, though.
That dinosaur is actually made by my friend Chris Wallace, who created the Gremlins for the movie Gremlins.
Oh, I just saw that for the first time during COVID. I have watched
Really?
more movies this year than I
I
have
know,
ever watched
haven't
before.
we all? No kidding.
Watched E.T. as well, but not for the first time.
Well, if you blink, you miss me. I'm the doctor holding the clipboard when the doctor's on the end.
Okay, so everyone watching this show, next time you see E.T., look for James with the clipboard.
Right.
So, tell me about your year as it pertains
So-
to, everything relates
To everything,
to
yeah.
COVID, right?
It's well, one interesting thing is, I've been at home with my wife Jill. We haven't gone very, outside the house much, and I think it may be the first time we've ever lived together, day after day after day, without me going to work or one of us taking a trip or for this long, and it's been kind of wonderful. We got on each other's nerves sometimes, but it's been a great experience.
Huh.
So there was that aspect to this year. There was all the political insanity with Trump and all that, and that was sort of upsetting on top of everything else, and particularly the way he was protracting the COVID crisis and deepening it, and making it worse. It was very upsetting to me, medically as well as on a humanistic level.
Yeah.
But with all that as background, then, I started doing the sea shanty album. I wrote my first graphic novel. I did it with someone who did the illustrations. I'm not really an illustrator. And then he animated it as well, so that'll be coming out soon. But that was really a fun project. Ever since Watchmen, I think, was the first graphic novel I read years and years ago, I've really been kind of, I don't read them a lot, but I really love the ones that I love.
Huh.
And then
I want to ask you a question about that. What was that like? A graphic novel, or I've read a couple of graphic memoirs, so similar.
right.
and also not my.
Like Persepolis, that kind of thing.
There's one on my shelf right there, right there. Can't you see it? Called
Oh, yeah.
Dragon's Breath.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And in any case, I'm curious about. There's a lot of space left out in the language, in the word part of the narrative. So I'm curious what it's like, since you're not a visual artist. How did you work with someone? Because there's so much interplay between the words and the visuals in a
Right,
graphic
right.
book, right?
I am a visual artist in the sense that I've done movies and film kinds of things, short films, that sort of thing. I'm not in the sense of actually drawing illustrations. This began as a short monologue, like a 10-minute monologue that I wrote years ago, and then thought it'd be interesting to film. And then I read it again, and parts about it I didn't like, and so I changed some parts of it. And then I just noticed this graphic novel lying nearby, and I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. What if I turned it into a graphic novel? So then I rewrote it again and reframed it, trying to imagine what text would go with what picture, and chunked it up into, 40 different sections for 40 different pictures. And it was a brand new experience. So it was something to try.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'll do it again, but it was fun.
Wow, I would love a bird's eye view of that whole process. How to communicate what it is that you would like it to look like.
Right,
How
that was
how the artist, like how you
It was
work
tricky.
that way.
Yeah, and the artist I just found out of the blue, he lives in Poland. And I always used to love, I would see tourneys of animation festivals from around the world. And the Polish animation was always very dark, and my story was kind of a dark one. And kind of stylized, not hyper realistic, impressionistic sometimes, and that's kind of the feel that I wanted. All monotonal. We ended up doing it in sepia. So it was just, and I would describe to him what I was visualizing in the picture. I saw, let's have a close up of the guy's face, but in the background here, in this sort of forced perspective that you see in comic books and graphic novels, way in the distance there should be a child waving, and so he would come back to me with his draft, and I would give him notes on that and say, that's great, but make this part stronger, and I don't really like the expression on his face, and do this, and then he would do another draft, and then it would be great.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
So interesting. I'm thinking about the poem that you wanted to share today.
Yeah.
And should we move into that, or
Sure.
There are so many interesting things to talk about, from your music to your writing, of course,
Right.
all the other stuff. But but since this is Tomes and Tunes,
Right.
music and writing, but I'm also curious about this poem, and you wanted
Sure.
to talk about it a little bit.
I was thinking of, I've read before a passage from my last book, Matamoros. I was going to do that today. Matamoros is, I'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about the song. It's a historical adventure romance. But this is one of my favorite poems that I come back to every few years just to reread. And I took a line out of it as the epigraph to my graphic novel. Maybe I'll talk about that after I read it.
Sure.
The novel itself starts out taken from a true story about a slumlord who is sentenced to live in one of his tenement apartments by the judge for building violations, sentenced to live there for a month as his punishment. So that's kind of what my graphic novel is about, is this guy and his first night living in his tenement. So
What country was that? Was
here?
that the U.S.? Okay.
Yeah. And I've heard of it happening twice. It happened once here in Santa Barbara, but it happened years and years ago in L.A. as well. So I had the chance to reread this poem then when I was getting the epigraph for it, and so I thought I would just read it. And my thought was to read the poem. It's not real long, and then we could talk a little bit about some of the lines that strike me and what it means to me, what it might have struck you as, and then I'll read it again, because poetry is often so dense to me that the first reading, a lot of it just goes by me. And so once I talk about it and understand it, a second reading makes much more sense. So this is a poem called Charles on Fire. The poet is James Merrill.
It's always a mystery. Where's the camera? How to
Where's
show
the camera?
Yeah.
Who died? Merrill died about 10 or 15 years ago, I think. Sort of a mid-20th century poet. And this is Charles on Fire. Another evening we sprawled about discussing appearances. And it was the consensus that while uncommon physical good looks continued to launch one as before in life, among its vaporous eddies and false calms, still, as one of us said into his beard, without your intellectual and spiritual values, man, you are sunk. No one but squared the shoulders of his own unloveliness. Long-suffering Charles, having cooked and served the meal, now brought out little tumblers finely etched, he filled with amber liquor and then passed around. Say, said the same young man, in Paris, France, they do it this way, bounding to his feet and touching a lit match to our host's full glass. A blue flame, gentle, beautiful, went above the surface. In a hush that fell, we heard the vessel crack. The contents drained as who should step down from a crystal coach. Steward of spirits, Charles's glistening hand all at once gloved itself in eeriness. The moment passed. He made 2 quick sweeps and was flesh again. It couldn't matter less, he said, but with a shocked, unconscious glance into the mirror. Finding nothing changed, he filled a fresh glass and sank down among us. So, what strikes me about the poem is, here's, kind of an urbane, I think I discovered it first when I was living in LA, and going to a lot of superficial dinner parties, and business parties, work parties. Urbanity and superficiality sort of were the hallmarks for me. And that's kind of what this dinner party is about. But then Charles, the host, has a glass of brandy, and this guy lights it. And there's the image of him holding this glass with a blue flame dancing above the glass, and then the glass cracks. And he describes the flaming brandy going down his arm. And for just a moment, here's a man standing here with a flaming blue arm. And then he pats his arm out, and it's fine. But this image he has of himself, that we all have of him, is this who he really is? Is this who we really are? Are we really creatures of blue flame inside us that we hide with these masks of our daily lives? And the line, 2 quick sweeps, his hand was flesh again. It couldn't matter less, he said, but with a shocked, unconscious glance into the mirror. Sort of one of these moments where we have this self-revelatory moment of these spirit lives we really are, that we hide all the time. And when we look and see ourselves just for a moment, there's a sense of awe, but also a little bit of terror or horror or disorientation about, is that what our lives really are, and why are we masking them? Why are we hiding them? And it's too much to even face, so we just go back to our dinner party and everything's okay.
Right, so it's like that glimpse into divinity.
Yeah, exactly. And is that an angel or a demon or just some flaming creature?
Right.
Or a divinity, yeah.
Right, and what do you do with that?
Exactly.
In any case, what do you do with that? I mean, how would you continue on in your human life, with your dinner parties with your friends, which
exactly
you have, in this poem, I'm thinking at least they're having a good enough time, but if suddenly they get a glimpse of the divine, how could they at all enjoy this kind of dinner party again?
Right. And I've had
them.
one or two moments in my life like this. One where I actually died and had an out-of-body experience briefly, and came back, And it was like it rocked my life. It's like everything should have changed, but I couldn't see how or what. And finally, I just compartmentalizing, put it behind me, because you have to move on with your life and deal with your taxes and grocery shopping and all the rest of the stuff that we do.
I have not died physically, but I think that I think of two moments in my life when I have been scraped down right to the marrow, and everything did change out of that.
Yeah.
It's funny that it was the maybe it happened many more times than that, but the times I'm thinking of are after I recorded my third album and was on tour and traveling constantly. I for a variety of reasons that I won't bore the airwaves with today, completely quit music. There was sort of like that was at the end of 2006, beginning of 2007. It took me till 2009 to really 100% step away, but something completely died in that time, and then fast forward 10 years, in 2018, I built this shed that I'm sitting in right now, and there was something in the building of the shed that immediately I came back to music, and I started from the beginning. Clarinet was my primary instrument for most of my life, and I still play it, and that was the instrument that I came back to and just rushed home from my day job every day to come back and play my clarinet. And then 6 weeks later, I put the clarinet down and picked up the guitar, and I have barely touched the clarinet since then.
Wow.
And I have played guitar nearly every day since, and started writing songs again. And there was in both circumstances, one I think of as a death and the other I think of as a birth, but really what's the difference? There's something that dies on both sides, and there's something that's born on both sides. In both circumstances, it had this sense of urgency. I feel like I relate to that blue flame moment with them both.
And it also, in the same vein, when he's talking about the vessel cracked and it came down his arm, the line is, "The contents drained as who should step down from a crystal coach." So it's the image
I liked that line a lot.
Of someone stepping down from a crystal coach, completely covered in blue flame. It's like, this is who we are in reality. The line I took as the epigraph for my graphic novel was, "It couldn't matter less," he said, "but with a shocked, unconscious glance into the mirror." And that's sort of the subtext about this guy who was sentenced. He goes through a crisis, his own kind of crisis, over the course of that night. Anyway, and the other line that sort of unrelated, but was a wonderful line, I thought, was in the beginning where they're talking about how as always, uncommon physical good looks will launch you in life, but without your intellectual and spiritual values, you're a sunk. And then everyone squared the shoulders of his own unloveliness. It's like we're all sort of eschewing. We don't really care about that being lovely stuff. It's because we all have this good spiritual values.
Yeah. There are some people, I think, who really lean into their physical loveliness, and that they kind of lead with that. And perhaps those other elements of themselves atrophy, or maybe not. But for a lot of people, I think they might. And then other people, almost in defiance,
Exactly.
Shrug that away, shrug the physical loveliness away, and want so much to be seen on those other levels. Perhaps that, and I wonder if there's a wholeness, if there's a way for us to mind, body, spirit, all of it exists, as in this ever-changing, becoming verb way of being in the world. I wonder if there's a way to embrace that. I think so. But
for sure, there should be. It's hard. It's hard in contemporary life. A song that I wrote years ago for an earlier album, "Man Walks Into a Bar," was a song called "The Invisible Blue Girl," and it was kind of two women. Particularly, that was a time when I was spending all my time in Hollywood and television. There's some women who are so beautiful that they spend their whole lives, and they're told they're beautiful all the time, and they start to forget who they really are and who they are inside.
Yes.
And they kind of coast on that, and if that goes on too long, they end up seeming kind of lost to themselves and to other people, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a real detriment, I think, especially for girls,
Yeah.
but maybe people of all gender, to be, you know, it's not that you don't ever want to compliment somebody on, you know, you look great today or whatever it is, but I think it can be really detrimental if there's an imbalance, especially if
Yeah.
it's a strong imbalance where the girl is, you know, either so complimented or so celebrated for
Yeah.
that. You know, it can be.
Then they have to put up walls at some point because it becomes like an assault almost from other people telling them how beautiful they are. And so once those walls go up, then it's harder again becoming intimate in any way.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And also, you know, the physical body is constantly changing, both for
Tell me about
it. Just for natural aging, but also for all kinds of things. You know,
Yeah.
you know, disease, illness, accident. You know, that a blue flame rolling down your arm at a dinner party.
Right.
I mean, that, you know,
Right.
I can't help but think, you know, oh, that person would be scarred, you know, from that. You know, and so if, you know, for that. I'm thinking of how you just said, you know, that armor or shell. I can't remember the word that you just used. You know, where that
Shield,
girl
yeah.
becomes the shield. You know,
Yeah.
has to defend herself. But also, then what does she do? Because she's being complimented for the moment in time that she
Yeah.
appears.
Right.
But then there's going to be very likely, hopefully, decades
Yeah.
that follow.
Yeah. What happens
Yeah,
then?
yeah. I want to say hi to Chrissy McCree, tuning in from, I don't know if you're in Nashville or the Carolinas, but Chrissy, nice to see you. And anybody else who's watching, please say hi in the chat so we know where you are. James, thank you. That was really enjoyable. Do you want to read the poem one more time?
Sure. Do we have time?
Yeah. You only read it one time, right? I feel like we've
Yeah,
talked about it so
yeah.
much that I'm like,
I know.
I've got such strong visuals of it. But please, yes,
Right,
read
right.
it one more
Okay.
time now that we've talked about it.
Another evening we sprawled about discussing appearances, and it was the consensus that while uncommon physical good looks continued to launch one as before in life among its vaporous eddies and false calms, still, as one of us said into his beard, without your intellectual and spiritual values, man, you are sunk. No one but squared the shoulders of his own unloveliness. Long-suffering Charles, having cooked and served the meal, now brought out little tumblers finely etched. He filled with amber liquor and then passed. Say, said the same young man, in Paris, France, they do it this way. Bounding to his feet and touching a lit match to our host's full glass. A blue flame, gentle, beautiful, came, went above the surface. In a hush that fell, we heard the vessel crack. The contents drained as who should step down from a crystal coach. Steward of spirits, Charles's glistening hand all at once gloved itself in eeriness. The moment passed. He made 2 quick sweeps and was flesh again. It couldn't matter less, he said, but with a shocked, unconscious glance into the mirror. Finding nothing changed, he filled a fresh glass and sank down among us.
You know what I also like is how brief it is, but there is scene, there's character development, there's an
Yeah.
inciting event,
Right.
there's a time before, there's the inciting event, and then there's a time
Yeah,
after.
it's a real narrative, yeah.
Yeah, it's full of imagery. There's a lot of furniture, as they say in Nashville. Like there's, you know, there's a lot there, and yet it's trying to make a point, but it's not just you know coming out with the point. It's
Right.
couching it in this setting.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
dinner party,
I was also
yeah.
struck by the very last line this time. He sank down among us, because for a moment he was divinity. He was elevated in the ether,
Yeah.
and then now he's back down to earth with the rest of us.
Yeah.
So.
And
Charles
those
on fire.
moments, in those moments when we ourselves have appeared in that true divine way,
Yeah.
or when we have witnessed it in other people, it can also be a terribly awkward moment. People don't
Yeah.
know what to do with us, or
Right,
we don't know what
right.
to do with them, because here we
yeah.
are in the mundanity.
Mundane, yeah, the quotidian. Everyone is glad to
Yeah.
sort of pretend it didn't happen almost.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
Sure.
I'm reading. I'm reading a few books right now. This happens.
Yeah.
And I'm also listening to an audiobook at the same time. So
Wow.
there are a lot of things swirling in my head at the moment. But I think I'm gonna come back to this because I love the language of Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses, which is going to be terribly blown out in my camera. But that's one of the things I'm reading right now. I was looking for a good quote from Bob Dylan's the Chronicles, which has been on my shelf, I think, since my dad sent it to me in, let's see if it's dated, in 2005.
Wow.
It's been on my shelf, but in 2006 I had that death, so I didn't want to come anywhere near music.
Right.
So, but I was looking for inspiration the other night, and I picked it up again. He sent it to me for my birthday, and he says that he loves and misses me, and he's looking forward to seeing me at the Seder.
Where is he?
So, he's in Florida. So that was in 2005. I guess I did travel perhaps for the Seder that year. So this is Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses, and let's see here. Oh, and this relates to the film industry, actually. I'll start here. Okay. On screen, he played the fall guy, the idiot who loves the beauty and can't see that she wouldn't go for him in 1,000 years. The funny uncle, the poor relation, the village idiot, the servant, the incompetent crook. None of them the type of part that ever rates a love scene. Women kicked him, slapped him, teased him, laughed at him, but never, on celluloid, looked at him or sang to him or danced around him with cinematic love in their eyes. Off-screen, he lived alone in 2 empty rooms near the studios and tried to imagine what women looked like without clothes on. To get his mind off the subject of love and desire, he studied, becoming omnivorous autodidact. I feel like I'm stumbling on these words, but there's no reason why I should. They're familiar. Anyway, devouring the metamorphic myths of Greece and Rome, the avatars of Jupiter, the boy who became a flower, the spider woman, Circe, everything. The unified field theory, the incident of the Satanic Verses in the early career of the prophet, and the politics of Muhammad's harem after his return to Mecca in triumph, and the surrealism of the newspapers in which butterflies could fly into young girls' mouths asking to be consumed, and children were born with no faces, and young boys dreamed in impossible detail of earlier incarnations. For instance, in a golden fortress filled with precious stones. He filled himself up with God knows what, but he could not deny in the small hours of his insomniac nights that he was full of something that he had never been used, that he did not know how to begin to use, that is, love. In his dreams, he was tormented by women of unbearable sweetness and beauty. So he preferred to stay awake and force himself to rehearse some part of his general knowledge in order to blot out the tragic feeling of being endowed with a larger than usual capacity for love without a single person on earth to offer it to. His big break arrived with the coming of the theological movies. And his big break is that he gets to perform as Ganesha or Hanuman or any number of these Indian gods. So that was his big break. And I'm really enjoying the language of this book, so I wanted to share that.
That's great. And it shares something with the poem, I think, talking about this, what's inside him that no one will ever see.
Yeah.
You know, this great love, these mythological creatures.
Yeah. Yeah, when I got to that part, I was like, oh yeah, this is related. We didn't plan it.
Right.
Have you read this book before?
I have not, no, but it makes me want to.
Yeah, another one that I've had on my shelf for ages. One of the upsides to the pandemic is that I haven't
Yeah.
gone to bookstores, and I'm finally getting to a number
Oh.
of the books that have been sitting there begging for my attention. So,
We put a tiny library out in front of our house, and we filled it with our books at first, but it partly was a way to start thinning out our library, but it's just been self-sustaining ever since, and people take books and leave books, and so my reading has come from books that people leave at our little
oh,
library there, and
nice.
just a random assortment of interesting things. Yeah.
I always look in those little tiny libraries that I pass when I'm walking around town.
Yeah.
I have never taken a book. I've been tempted, but I have
Yeah.
never taken a book, in part because my sweetheart he hasn't put his foot down about it, but it seems like every time I bring a new book into the house, there's a groan. There's sort of like a, oh boy, another one.
Another one.
So I've resisted. I haven't taken any of the books, but every single time I pass one of those, I stop for
Yeah,
a while
yeah,
and just, yeah, I love them. And I've thought about erecting my own actually, but I can't part with, this is related to my husband groaning, but I can't part with my books. I can't
Yeah, yeah.
put them in the little library, so
Yeah.
I don't know what I would put out there.
Well, one of my secret glees is contemporary detective fiction, but it's pretty tossable after I'm done with it. So I read those and then I put them in the library.
Right. Oh, I'm scanning in my mind right now my bookshelves. Like, what would I put in there? I'm afraid that I would put the books that I haven't yet read, because the books I have read, inevitably I want to go back to them at some point.
Sure,
Not necessarily to read them, also sometimes, but sometimes just to find something in them that
Yeah.
I've kind of stowed
And
away.
I just like surrounding myself with books too. So.
There's that as well. James, do you have a song to play for us today?
Yeah, this is a song. So I'm going to try and do this without crashing into the microphone. This is a song from, I mentioned my novel Matamoros. It's a Civil War novel in 1863. And just briefly about that, it's Matamoros was the town in Mexico across the border from Brownsville, Texas. And it was known as the back door of the Confederacy because the North had blockaded all the southern ports in America, but they couldn't blockade a Mexican port because that's by international law, they couldn't do that. So the Confederacy shipped all of its cotton to Brownsville, Texas, and then across the Rio Grande into Matamoros. And then from Matamoros, it got shipped out to England and Belgium and France. And then those countries shipped in guns and ammunition to Matamoros, meant for the South. They got put back to Brownsville, Texas, and then shipped into the South. So while that was going on, by the way, Napoleon had invaded Mexico. And so there was a huge war in Mexico at the same time as our Civil War. So Matamoros was kind of like Casablanca. It was full of northern and southern spies, French foreign legionnaires, Austrian mercenaries, Texas Rangers, Mexican banditos. It was a great setting for a novel.
Sounds like a snooze. Oh, I'm intrigued. That sounds exciting.
So I came out with a CD at the same time, I released at the same time, and each song on the CD is about one of the characters in the novel. And this one is about Scully, who's an Irish IRA outlaw who was chased by the British and fled to France and joined the French Foreign Legion, just in time for Napoleon to ship him over to Mexico to fight with the French. I learned some interesting things about the French Foreign Legion. There were no French soldiers in it. There were French officers, but all the fighting soldiers were from other countries who had, mostly outlaws and renegades who were fleeing from something and joined the Foreign Legion. And they were taught in the Foreign Legion, it was drilled into them that they couldn't be loyal to their home countries or to France or to any country or to any wife or girlfriend. They could be loyal only to the Legion. And that's where the term esprit de corps comes from. It's the spirit of the corps and the loyalty only to that and to nothing else. So this is about Scully, this Irish outlaw who joined the French Foreign Legion and finds himself in Matamoros he got wounded in the Battle of Cameroon, which is an actual battle, and now he's just becoming an alcoholic in the Matamoros bar and becomes a minor part of our story. but this is Scully's Redemption, it's called. I was wanted by the crown for mayhem and such, sailed the channel just to get away. Well, I never did like those Frenchies much, but I joined their service on a strong, fine day, become a French Foreign Legionnaire. I fought for Napoleon Bonaparte to conquer old Mexico. Well, a tropical lady liked to stole my heart. She asked me to stay, but I said no, I'm a French Foreign Legionnaire. Oh. We marched in regiment from Veracruz to the Battle of Cameroon. To arms, did you hear the news? They wiped us out, but for me alone in the French Foreign Legion. I wandered many a savage night, foul sleep gave me no rest, nor peace nor gardens of delight, 'twas all a bitter jest, and my heart an exiled guest. Knocked the wind right out of my esprit de corps, winter of '63. So I drifted on over up to Matamoros, looking for my darling senorita. French Foreign Legion, no more for me, sir. I knew every toss pot in every bar. Me spirit was in need of repair. Can no one love this sorry tar? Could you spot me a drink, sir? Have a care for this late life French Foreign Legionnaire. I passed out in the garden of a hacienda, me so thirsty as a dry bed stream. But their kitchen lass became a good friend of mine. She held me in middling esteem. Now my legionnaire days are but a dream. So I work with me darling in the kitchen, sir. Should have done this a long time ago. I'd be drunk or dead if it wasn't for her, and I come pretty close when I soldiered. Oh, in a life I wouldn't want a soul to know. Yes, I work in the kitchen with me darling, sir. Should have done this a long time gone. I'd be dead inside, but for knowing her, I was dead to life when I soldiered on in a time before I knew you, my dear sweet son. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. You know, I love books. I love reading the page, but there's something about hearing a story sung to you that just feels timeless. And it's such a music is just such a great vessel for delivering story.
Yeah, and that goes right into the heart, I find, to my heart anyway, in a way
Yeah.
that a lot of times prose on the page doesn't.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I think I'll take it out. I've been playing new songs lately each week, but with Mother's Day coming up, I think I tend to think about loss. I tend to think about a lot of the complicated feelings that days like Mother's Day bring up, and I would think about them anyway, but they're sort of a fire hose feeling about days like Valentine's Day and Mother's Day and these days that Hallmark has deemed flowers and pink and glitter. I don't know. There's something like and that fire hose feeling about them. I think can be incredibly painful for people who, and I think that there is a lot of complicated feelings about it for many people, if not most people, if not all people, because as you know, time is time. I mean, time passes, and there's a lot of loss associated with the day.
Sure.
Whether it's the generation above or the generation below, or the fact that there was no generation below or no generation above, or the fact that there are just fraught and difficult relationships, or whatever it might be. So I wanted to play this song, which is on my new album, 1,000 Tiny Torches, which came out 11 months ago. I'm about to celebrate the year. And I have a celebration that's in the cooker to plan for that. But this song is some of the songs on the album are very lively, I will say, energetic, and then there are a couple that are ballads and quieter. But I would say that of that, this one I think is the most tender of them, and it's called "Only Forever," and it's it came out of a conversation that I had with a woman about the loss of her child. Let's see here. Let me just make a little adjustment. There we go. Can you hear the guitar? I waited for you. I waited for you a long time. Stood outside the schoolyard, the swings twisting in the wind. I prayed for you. I prayed for you a long time, to chase you in the park, try to catch you in a sprint. And things I know but can... Hold on a second, I can't hear myself that well. There we go. And things I know but cannot explain. How life is measured by what you lose and what you gain. How to fight for what you treasure. Let it go when it's time to surrender. And how I love you only forever. You came to me. You grew up tall. Gangly, I taught you how to swim. Taught you everything I know. But maybe God was lonely, or fate knew all along I'd protect you with my life. But Lord knows I'm not that strong. Things I know but cannot explain. How Life is measured by what you lose and what you gain. How to fight for what you treasure. Let it go when it's time to surrender. And how I'll love you only forever. They say wounds yield a purpose, and cracks bring the light. All I know is stone on the earth, angel in the sky. Things I know but cannot explain. How life is measured by what you lose and what you gain. And how to fight for what you treasure. Let it go when it's time to surrender. And how I love you only forever.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I love that the final recurring lyric. I love you only forever. That's really nice.
Thank you.
And great whistling too.
That's a gift from my dad and also my grandfather on my mother's side. When I was a little girl, I want to guess around 4 years old maybe, he walked me down to the 7-Eleven and bought me one of those lollipops that's a slide whistle. Like that. And so we walked home from the 7-Eleven and with me going, and my grandfather being like, and I was like, how'd you do that? And poor him, because he then taught me, you know, I mean, as much as you can teach someone how to whistle, he taught me how to whistle that day on the way home from the 7-Eleven. And we were living in Tallahassee at the time. And a year or two later, we moved up to Queens, New York, and moved in with my grandparents in Queens. And poor them, because by then I was a whistling machine. I would not stop, so my grandmother at that point was like, no whistling in the house. I know. Well, James, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with me. I want to say hi to Mark in Texas. Mark, I'm so glad you were able to make it. And Dee, you're not too late. Late seating is allowed, and you can catch the replay. It'll be, you know, you can start from the beginning right now. James, such a pleasure talking with you about all the things. Really enjoyable.
Great pleasure. My pleasure. Really had a good time.
Yeah. And so before I let you go, so do you have some dates that you need to share with us, or that you would like to share with us in terms of any of these projects that have been released?
Nothing scheduled specifically. I'll announce on my on Facebook and Twitter when the graphic novel comes out and when the shanties come out.
Okay. So everybody who's watching right now, they can find you on Twitter at, what is your handle there? Is it?
At that James Kahn.
That's right. I'm going to put that in the chat box right now. And is that the same one for Facebook?
No, Facebook has, gosh, I can't remember the Facebook.
That James Kahn.
James Kahn Words and Music, I think, is the Facebook.
That James Kahn is the Twitter. And I'm sorry, say it one more time for Facebook.
James Kahn Words and Music.
James Kahn Words, A-N-D, music.
Yes.
There we go.
And YouTube is James Kahn Entertainments, if you want to put
Goodness
that.
gracious. YouTube. Oh, there we go. Okay, and YouTube is something different. Okay, what is it?
James Kahn Entertainments.
James Kahn Entertainments. I hope there are no typos. I don't think there are. So y'all find James Kahn everywhere at all the different places and follow him. That'll be fun with the book and the music. And
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing all of that with us today.
Yeah.
Really
Thanks
fun.
for having me.
Yeah. You stay there, and I'm going to take you out of the feed and say goodbye to everyone else. Thank you so much for watching episode 50. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Not only will you find out when I go live every week, it's every Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific, but you'll get a little alert about that. But also, you'll be helping me. I'm an independent artist, and it's really great to get those follows on all of the socials. So there's that, and also you can find me, everywhere. And all of those links are right there at the linktr.ee/ArielleSilver. So until we meet again, I hope that you take good care, and I will be back here Thursday next week. And one last thing, on May 18th, on Tuesday, I am playing a live stream show. So please do follow me everywhere, and you'll hear about that. But the show is called Music My Mother Would Not Like. So maybe that's fitting for Mother's Day. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and week, and take good care.